The flag cracked sharply in the cold morning wind as formation broke apart. Engines idled near headquarters, exhaust hanging low, while boots scuffed concrete and voices carried in short, tired bursts. Colonel Mark Caldwell stood near the entrance, coffee in hand, confidence loose on his shoulders. He glanced at the quiet civilian woman waiting off to the side and smirked, making no effort to lower his voice. "Another consultant," he said, shaking his head. "Paper pushers. Box checkers. People who tell soldiers how to fight wars without ever wearing a uniform." A few officers laughed, polite and automatic. Enlisted soldiers pretended to focus on their tasks, but their ears tilted toward the sound. Disrespect traveled fast on a base like this. The woman did not respond. Evelyn Cross stood still, a slim folder held against her coat, posture relaxed but deliberate. She watched the flag, not the colonel, as if the noise beside her carried no weight. Caldwell kept talking, enjoying the audience. His smile widened when she remained silent, mistaking restraint for weakness. She waited. And in that waiting, something tightened in the air, unseen but unmistakable. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Evelyn Cross looked like someone who belonged nowhere important. Mid-50s, plain civilian coat buttoned to the collar, sensible shoes, no jewelry beyond a simple watch, no insignia, no badge on display. Nothing about her suggested authority, and that was exactly why no one looked twice. Colonel Caldwell barely glanced at her paperwork before handing it back with a tight smile. He spoke fast, already turning his body away, explaining schedules and timelines like she was a delay he intended to manage, not a person he intended to respect. To him, she was an outside auditor at best. At worst, a waste of a morning. "We'll get you an escort," he said. "See the basics. Then you'll be on your way." The words sounded efficient. The meaning was clear. In and out. No depth. No disruption. First Lieutenant Aaron Blake was called over and handed the task without ceremony. He was young, crisp in his uniform, the kind of officer who still believed in doing things right, but had learned quickly when to keep his mouth shut. He saluted Caldwell, nodded once, then turned to Evelyn. "Yes, ma'am," he said automatically, then corrected himself. "I mean, this way." As they walked, Blake tried to read her. Most visitors filled the silence with questions or small talk. Evelyn did neither. She walked at a steady pace, hands relaxed at her sides, eyes moving slowly, deliberately, as if she were reading the base instead of touring it. She noticed things Blake had stopped noticing months ago. The way a group of soldiers shifted their weight when an officer passed. The way one sergeant kept his shoulders square but his jaw tight. The way a young private adjusted his cover too quickly, hands shaking just enough to betray nerves. At the motor pool, she paused without asking permission. Her gaze settled on a clipboard hanging from a hook near a Humvee. The maintenance log was smudged with grease, entries neat but rushed. She did not touch it. She did not comment. She simply read it from where she stood. Blake cleared his throat. "We usually start with the briefing room." "In a moment," she said softly. Her voice was calm. Not hesitant, just measured. She watched a mechanic crawl out from beneath a vehicle, wipe his hands, and glance toward the headquarters building before answering a question from a junior NCO. That glance lasted less than a second. Evelyn saw it anyway. As they moved through the communications section, a staff sergeant began explaining a recurring equipment issue. Halfway through the sentence, his eyes flicked toward the door. His words softened. The problem shrank. What had been a pattern became an isolated inconvenience. Evelyn nodded once, not encouraging, not dismissive. Blake felt a growing unease he could not explain. She asked the kind of questions civilians did not ask, not about policy. About execution, about timing, about what happened when plans changed without notice. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, she never wasted a word. At lunch, she chose a table near enlisted soldiers instead of the officer section. She ate slowly, observing the rhythm of the room. Who laughed freely? Who spoke only after looking around? Who stayed silent altogether? Blake realized she had not written anything down. No notes. No tablet. Nothing. "How are you remembering all this?" he asked before he could stop himself. She looked up at him then, really looked at him, eyes steady and clear. "I've had a lot of practice paying attention." That was all she said. Throughout the afternoon, Caldwell appeared unexpectedly, dropping into conversations, steering explanations, correcting subordinates mid-sentence. Each time, Evelyn adjusted her posture slightly, giving him space to speak. Each time, she stepped back and let the room change around him. Blake began to understand something without being able to name it. This was not passivity. This was control of a different kind. When Caldwell left, conversations loosened by inches. Voices lowered, truth edged closer to the surface, then retreated again. Evelyn noticed every shift. By the end of the day, Blake felt exhausted. She looked unchanged, still calm, still observant, still carrying that slim folder unopened. As they walked back toward headquarters, Caldwell waved them off from a distance, already distracted, already convinced the day had gone his way. Evelyn stopped near the flagpole. The sun was lower now, light cutting across the concrete. "Lieutenant," she said, not unkindly. "How long have you been here?" Blake answered honestly. She nodded, eyes returning to the flag. "Good unit," she said. "Good people." He waited for the rest. It did not come. Her stillness was not weakness. It was restraint learned over years when reacting too soon cost lives. And as she stood there, quiet and unremarkable, the base continued to underestimate the most dangerous thing it could. A leader who was listening. The inspection tour began the way most did on this base. Loud at first, confident, carefully staged. Colonel Mark Caldwell insisted on leading the way, positioning himself half a step in front of Evelyn Cross as if proximity alone could control the narrative. His voice filled hallways before they entered them, announcing strengths, awards, and readiness percentages with rehearsed ease. At the motor pool, engines were already warm. Soldiers stood straighter than normal. Tools were aligned with unnatural precision. Caldwell clapped his hands once, sharp and theatrical. "Best maintenance metrics in the brigade," he said. "My people don't cut corners." A sergeant stepped forward when Evelyn asked about turnaround times. He opened his mouth, paused, then glanced sideways. Caldwell was close, 3 feet away. Close enough to hear breath. "Well," the sergeant began, voice steady at first, "we usually—" Caldwell cut in smoothly. "We exceed standard timelines." "Next question." The sergeant nodded, swallowing the rest of his sentence. His shoulders stiffened. The truth retreated. Evelyn said nothing. She shifted her weight slightly, eyes still on the sergeant, giving him space that leadership had not. He did not take it. They moved on. In the communications room, racks hummed with low mechanical noise. Screens glowed. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Hale explained a recurring fault with aging equipment. Her words were precise, practiced from months of repetition. "The issue tends to spike during high usage," Caldwell laughed softly. "Old gear always has quirks." "Nothing mission impacting." Hale's mouth closed mid-sentence. Her eyes dropped to the floor. She nodded once, professional, obedient. The room felt smaller. Evelyn's gaze lingered on the equipment longer than necessary. She noticed temporary fixes layered over permanent ones. Tape where brackets should have been. Logs adjusted just enough to look clean. She did not challenge Caldwell. She did not rescue Hale. She remembered. In the briefing room, officers sat around the table, backs straight, faces neutral. Caldwell paced as he spoke, answering questions before they were asked. "When morale dips," he said, "it's usually external stressors. Families. Deployments. Nothing leadership related." A captain shifted in his chair. "Sir, sometimes schedule changes." Caldwell waved him off. "Operational necessity. My officers understand that." The captain nodded, cheeks tight. Laughter surfaced occasionally, but thinner now. Polite. Careful. the kind of laughter used to signal alignment, not joy. Eyes began to lower when Evelyn entered rooms. Conversations shortened. People waited for Caldwell's reactions before forming their own. What would you have done if your commander was standing 3 feet away? Would you risk your career for the truth? At lunch, Caldwell took a call and stepped away. The room breathed for the first time all day. Voices softened. Someone mentioned maintenance delays again, quietly. Another hinted at constant last-minute changes. When Caldwell returned, silence snapped back into place. Evelyn noticed how fast it happened. By mid-afternoon, the tour felt less like an inspection and more like a performance struggling to stay upright. Caldwell's interruptions grew sharper. His jokes edged into defensiveness. People exaggerate, he said at one point. Weak leaders complain upward. Evelyn met his eyes briefly, not in challenge. In acknowledgement, she wrote nothing down. That seemed to bother him more than confrontation would have. At the range, an NCO hesitated before answering a question about training cancellations. He glanced at Caldwell, then back at Evelyn, then chose safety. "Everything's on track," he said. Evelyn nodded. Later, in a hallway, Lieutenant Aaron Blake noticed something he could not unsee anymore. When Caldwell spoke, people froze. When he left, shoulders dropped. This was not discipline. This was fear wearing a uniform. As the day dragged on, Caldwell began narrating louder, as if volume could drown out observation. He corrected minor details aggressively. He praised himself often. Evelyn stayed quiet. She recorded everything the base tried to hide by how it behaved, not what it said. By the end of the tour, tension had replaced confidence. Laughter was gone. Words were measured. Silence did most of the talking. Caldwell smiled anyway. He thought he was winning. He had no idea the record was already complete. By the second day, the base felt different, not louder, not quieter, just aware of itself in a way that made small details impossible to ignore. Evelyn Cross moved through the morning briefing without fanfare, standing near the wall instead of taking a seat. When an officer mentioned a readiness metric, she asked how it was measured during short-notice taskings. Not the number, the method. The question landed softly, but it landed deep. "That's usually covered under standard guidance," the officer replied. "Which revision?" Evelyn asked, already knowing the answer. There was a pause. Caldwell stepped in, voice smooth, dismissive. "Current doctrine." "We keep up." Evelyn nodded once. "Of course." Lieutenant Aaron Blake felt a tightening in his chest. Civilians did not ask questions like that. They asked about compliance. About percentages. About policy language. She asked about execution, and she did it without notes, without hesitation. At the motor pool, she used the phrase, deferred maintenance threshold, in passing. No one corrected her. No one questioned it. They simply adjusted their answers, as if she had spoken a language they all understood but had not expected to hear from her. In the communications room, she referred to a contingency plan by its shorthand designation. Staff Sergeant Hale looked up sharply, surprise flickering across her face before discipline snapped it away. Evelyn did not notice the reaction. Or perhaps she did, and chose not to acknowledge it. Sergeant Major Linda Morales did notice. Morales had been watching Evelyn since the first walkthrough, watching how she stood just outside the circle, never forcing her way in. Watching how she waited an extra beat before speaking, letting others fill the silence or retreat from it. Years of service had trained Morales to recognize patterns that did not belong to chance. Timing. Control. The kind of stillness that came from experience, not uncertainty. During a brief pause between events, Morales approached Evelyn under the pretense of confirming a schedule. Up close, the details sharpened. The way Evelyn's eyes moved first to exits, then to people. The way she angled her body slightly, maintaining awareness without appearing guarded. The way she listened without nodding, without encouraging, without betraying opinion. Morales had seen that posture before, on commanders, on inspectors, on people who had learned that reacting too soon cost more than it gained. "What brings you to us, really?" Morales asked carefully, voice low enough to be private but not secretive. Evelyn met her gaze evenly. Understanding. That was all. Morales studied her for a long moment, longer than protocol required. Then she nodded once and stepped back. Lieutenant Blake caught the exchange from a distance. Something in Morales's expression had changed. Less guarded, more alert, like someone who had found a familiar shape in unfamiliar terrain. Later, during a planning discussion, Evelyn asked about how last-minute taskings were communicated down to squads, not the process on paper. The reality. How often do soldiers get less than 12 hours' notice, she asked. Caldwell answered quickly. Rarely. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. Rarely enough to track, or rarely enough to ignore. The room went still. Blake felt his pulse quicken. That was not a civilian question. That was a leader's question. Caldwell laughed it off, but his laugh came a half-second late. As the afternoon wore on, the clues piled quietly. Evelyn corrected a timeline without referencing notes. She used a term for command climate surveys that had not been public in years. She referenced a leadership principle by its doctrinal name, not its slogan. No one said anything. They adjusted instead. The mystery tightened like a wire pulled slowly, deliberately. Blake found himself watching her more than the tour, watching how she absorbed the base without leaving fingerprints. Watching how people spoke differently when they realized she might be more than she appeared. Still, she revealed nothing. No badge, no rank, no story. Just silence, discipline, and questions that reached one layer deeper than anyone was comfortable answering. Whatever Evelyn Cross was, she was not who Colonel Caldwell thought she was, and the base was beginning to feel it. The private conversation happened without planning, without a door being closed or a chair being offered. It happened in a narrow hallway outside logistics, where the noise from the motor pool faded just enough to feel exposed. Sergeant Major Linda Morales waited until Lieutenant Blake was pulled away by a call. She did not rush. She did not signal. She simply turned toward Evelyn Cross and spoke as if commenting on the weather. "Walk with me," she said. Evelyn adjusted her pace without comment. They moved side by side, neither leading, neither following. Morales kept her voice low, steady, practiced. "I am choosing my words carefully," Morales said, "not because I don't know what to say. Because I know what it costs." Evelyn did not interrupt. She waited. Morales exhaled slowly. "People are afraid." The word hung between them, plain and heavy. "Not afraid of work," Morales continued. "Not afraid of deployment. Afraid of speaking." She stopped near a supply cage, eyes forward, hands clasped behind her back like she had done 1,000 times before. "We've had good soldiers reassigned after raising concerns. Careers stalled, evaluation shifted. Nothing you can point to on paper, just enough to make an example." Evelyn's face did not change, but her attention sharpened, subtle as a blade sliding free. Morales went on. "So people adapt. They learn which questions are safe, which ones aren't. They learn to look at the commander before answering." She finally turned. "That's not discipline. That's fear pretending to be order." For a moment, neither spoke. Footsteps echoed down the hall. A door opened and closed somewhere nearby. "What happens when someone pushes back?" Evelyn asked quietly. Morales hesitated. That hesitation said more than words. "They're labeled difficult. Not team players. Opportunities dry up." Evelyn nodded once. "Who decides that label?" Morales met her eyes. "Everyone knows." The conversation ended the way it began. Without ceremony. Morales straightened, adjusted her uniform, and stepped away as if nothing had happened. Evelyn remained where she was for a beat longer, absorbing not just the words, but the cost of saying them. Later that afternoon, in the chapel office, the air felt different. Quieter, safer in a way the rest of the base was not. Chaplain Andrew Collins sat across from Evelyn, hands folded, expression weary but open. He spoke without looking at the door, a habit learned from long experience. "I don't track names," he said. "I track patterns." Evelyn waited. "More soldiers come in for leadership stress than anything else," Collins continued. "Not combat. Not family. Leadership." He let that settle. "They don't say it loudly. They whisper it. They ask if it's normal to feel anxious before meetings, if it's normal to rehearse answers in their heads before speaking." "What do you tell them?" Evelyn asked. "That fear corrodes trust," Collins said. "That silence doesn't heal it. And that sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is admit something is wrong." Evelyn's eyes lifted. "Do they believe you?" "Some," he said. "Others just want to survive their assignment." When Evelyn left the chapel, she did not slow. She did not soften. Her questions for the rest of the day changed tone, subtle but unmistakable. She asked about evaluation timelines, about reassignment criteria, about who reviewed complaints and how often. She did not accuse. She did not suggest conclusions. She asked for mechanisms. Colonel Caldwell noticed immediately. At first, he responded with jokes, brushing off questions with sarcasm. "We're not running a daycare," he said at one point, laughter sharp and hollow. "Soldiers need thick skin." His voice grew louder as the afternoon wore on. He hovered closer during conversations. He corrected subordinates more aggressively, sometimes mid-sentence, sometimes mid-breath. When a captain hesitated before answering a question about personnel actions, Caldwell stepped forward. "We don't air internal matters," he said firmly. "This isn't that kind of visit." Evelyn looked at him, calm, attentive. "I understand," she said. "I'm asking how decisions are made." Caldwell's jaw tightened. "I make them." "Understood," she replied. "And the process?" The room went still. Caldwell laughed, but the sound carried an edge now. "You're digging for problems that aren't there." Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "I'm listening." That single word unsettled him more than confrontation would have. He began narrating constantly, filling every pause, explaining unasked details, reframing answers before they could land. By evening, his sarcasm had hardened into irritation. He mocked concerns openly. He dismissed stress as weakness. He referred to dissent as entitlement. The base felt it. Conversations shortened. Doors closed more quickly. Eyes tracked Caldwell's movements with new caution. Lieutenant Blake watched it all, heart sinking. He saw how the balance had shifted, how the colonel's confidence now required maintenance, how every interaction felt like a defense. Evelyn Cross never raised her voice. She never corrected him publicly. She never showed impatience. She simply adjusted her questions, one layer deeper each time, and with every answer Caldwell tried to control, the record grew clearer. The balance was tilting, not because Evelyn pushed, because Caldwell could not stop revealing who he was when control slipped from his hands. The final meeting took place in Colonel Caldwell's office just after noon. Sunlight cut through the blinds in sharp lines, striping the polished desk and the wall of awards behind it. Senior staff filled the chairs along the sides, backs straight, faces carefully neutral. No one spoke above a measured tone. The room already knew this was not routine. Colonel Mark Caldwell stood as Evelyn Cross entered, not out of respect, but control. He positioned himself behind his desk, hands spread wide on the surface like a man claiming territory. "Let's be efficient," he said. "I've got operational priorities." Evelyn nodded once and took the seat he indicated. She placed her slim folder on the desk between them and folded her hands. Her posture was relaxed, unchallenging. Caldwell began talking immediately. He recapped readiness metrics, praised leadership initiatives, dismissed concerns as misunderstandings. His voice grew louder as he spoke, filling every pause before anyone else could. When he finished, he leaned back slightly, satisfied. Evelyn did not respond right away. She opened the folder and removed a single document. No charts, no notes. Just one page. She placed it gently on the desk and slid it forward until it rested beneath Caldwell's hands. He glanced down, irritation already forming, then froze. The room went silent. No chairs moved, no papers rustled. Even breathing seemed to pause. The letterhead was unmistakable. The seal pressed into the page carried weight that did not need explanation. Caldwell's eyes moved from the signature to the orders line by line, color draining from his face. Evelyn spoke at last, her voice even and clear. "Major General Evelyn Cross," she said. "Inspector General, United States Army." No emphasis, no satisfaction. Just fact. She continued without raising her tone. "I was assigned to conduct an unannounced command climate inspection of this installation. My role was to observe leadership behavior, decision-making, and the treatment of personnel under routine conditions." Caldwell's mouth opened, then closed. The confidence that had carried him all week collapsed into stillness. Evelyn held his gaze, not accusing, not triumphant. "Unannounced inspections exist for a reason," she said. "They show how authority is exercised when leaders believe they are not being evaluated." She slid the document back into the folder and closed it. Around the room, eyes lowered, postures shifted. Understanding spread without words. Evelyn remained seated, calm, professional, absolute. The silence held, and in that silence, everything Colonel Caldwell thought he controlled was already gone. Colonel Caldwell did not explode. He did not shout. There was no dramatic outburst to mark the collapse of his authority. It happened the way real power failures do, quietly and all at once. His shoulders sagged first, just enough to be noticeable. The confident lean he had practiced so carefully against the edge of his desk disappeared. When he tried to speak, his voice caught in his throat, the words failing to organize themselves into command. "I didn't know," he finally said, too softly. No one responded. Around the room, something shifted before any instruction was given. Chairs straightened, as if pulled by an unseen line, backs aligned. Eyes lifted from the floor, no longer scanning for Caldwell's approval but settling, naturally, on Evelyn Cross. Respect moved through the room like a slow wave, not announced, not demanded. It was recognized. Evelyn did not stand immediately. She allowed the moment to settle, not as punishment, but as clarity. When she spoke, her tone remained calm, steady, stripped of emotion. "I did not come here to trap anyone," she said. "I came to observe truth." She looked around the room, meeting faces one by one. Officers, senior NCOs. People who had learned to speak carefully. "Command climate cannot be measured by slides or metrics alone," she continued. "It is revealed in hesitation, in silence, in how people behave when they believe their careers are at stake." Caldwell swallowed hard. His hands, once spread wide with confidence, now rested flat on the desk, fingers curled inward. Evelyn went on. "An unannounced inspection removes performance. It shows leadership without rehearsal." She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse. She explained, the way a commander explains intent before an operation. Across the room, Sergeant Major Linda Morales felt something ease in her chest. The weight of words she had carried carefully now had somewhere to land. Lieutenant Aaron Blake sat straighter, understanding settling into his expression like a new alignment of purpose. Evelyn stood then, smooth and unhurried. The movement drew every eye. "This is not about embarrassment," she said. "It is about responsibility." She turned toward Caldwell, not with anger, but with finality. "Leadership built on fear does not hold. It fractures." The room remained silent, but it was no longer tense. It was attentive. Without being directed, one officer stood. Then another. Chairs moved back in unison, a sound soft but unmistakable. The room came to its feet. Caldwell hesitated, then stood as well, slower now, the reality settling into his posture. Evelyn brought her hand up in a clean, precise motion. The salute was textbook. It imposed, unforced. For a fraction of a second, no one moved. Then Caldwell returned the salute, his motion slightly delayed, imperfect but sincere. The salute held longer than protocol required, not out of defiance, out of acknowledgement. In that suspended moment, rank mattered less than character. The room understood it without needing it spoken. When the salute finally dropped, Evelyn lowered her hand first. She did not smile. She did not seek reaction. But the respect in the room was undeniable. It was not granted because of her rank. It was earned by how she had carried it long before anyone knew it was there. The base did not erupt into chaos after the meeting. There were no raised voices in the hallways, no whispered celebrations, no public reckoning. What followed was quieter and far more real. Investigations began the way they always do, methodically. Professionally, paperwork moved. Interviews were scheduled. Processes unfolded without spectacle. Colonel Caldwell remained in position while oversight took its course, his authority intact on paper, but altered in practice. The base felt it immediately. People spoke more slowly now, but more honestly. Conversations no longer froze when footsteps approached. A few doors stayed open that had always been closed before. It was not relief that settled over the installation. It was air. Evelyn Cross did not stay to witness the change. She did not tour again. She did not accept thanks or acknowledgement. When her work was complete, she packed the same slim folder she had carried all week and walked out the way she had arrived. No entourage. No farewell formation. No applause. She paused once near the flagpole, the fabric snapping sharply in the wind, then continued toward an unmarked vehicle. To anyone watching from a distance, she looked like just another visitor leaving post. That was how she preferred it, because the story was never about her. It was about leadership, about the difference between authority that demands silence and authority that earns trust. About how fear often disguises itself as strength, using volume and control to hide insecurity. Real command presence does not need to announce itself. It shows in restraint, in listening, in how power is exercised when no one is watching. Colonel Caldwell had believed leadership meant dominance. That respect could be extracted through pressure. That compliance was proof of success. What he learned, too late, was that silence is not loyalty. It is survival. The soldiers on that base did not need a louder commander. They needed a safer one. Evelyn Cross never raised her voice. She never corrected anyone publicly. She never reminded anyone of her rank until it mattered. And when it did, the lesson landed without force. Because the strongest leaders do not need to intimidate. They do not need to perform. They understand that true authority is revealed in small moments, in how people are treated when they have nothing to offer in return. The way you treat the powerless reveals who you truly serve. Some of the most important moments in military life never make headlines. They happen in quiet rooms, behind closed doors, when character is tested without witnesses and leadership is measured without warning. True authority does not shout. It does not mock. It does not rely on fear to maintain control. It lives in discipline, in humility, and in the willingness to listen when silence would be easier. Stories like this matter because they remind us that strength is not always loud and respect is never automatic. It is earned, moment by moment, through how leaders treat those beneath them. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These stories keep the courage alive for generations to come.